I hear them gossip on the streets. Most of what they say is true. Anyway, hey man, I was listening to Snookeroo. Ringo Starr or Snookeroo. You know, Ringo didn't write a lot of his tunes, any of his hits anyway. You know, Hoyt Axton penned a few. But Snookeroo, oddly enough, even though it almost sounds like a Hoyt Axton kind of feel to it, it was actually written by Bernie Taupin and Elton John, believe it or not. Which I'm not surprised. It came out, the song came out in 1975. Elton John's sound was much different than this at that time, so I'm not surprised that they didn't record it. But it is interesting because it doesn't necessarily sound like, well, even Bernie Taupin's flair. Anyway, I decided to go, adjust my camera just a touch. Decided to go with an old fashioned. I've been trying to get a handle. So I'm more of a Manhattan drinker than an old fashioned. Old fashions are very popular. It seems like younger folks really like an old fashioned. For me, they're kind of sweet, but I've been trying to do them my way, where they're kind of a little bit less sweet. I did find a recipe on the internet that I kind of liked. I did tweak it a little bit, but the recipe itself was less sweet than most of them. And what I've done here is I've made my own simple syrup, and you can see that's not clear. Many bar syrups, simple syrups are clear. That's because I used a raw sugar, just so you know. But the biggest difference in most of the recipes that I've seen is, well, a lot of them, some will call for rye, some will call for bourbon. What I've decided to do here is I'm going to do two old-fashioned videos here. Using this Jack Daniel's Select Single Barrel, which is 94 proof, bourbon, or well, Tennessee whiskey, and then and the rye. So I'm going to do one with each since I have those whiskeys and kind of compare the different notes. It's Sunday. I think there was a mail truck driving through the neighborhood. I think he's confused, man. Don't get mail on Sunday. Maybe he just stole the truck and he's joyriding around. Anyway, I'm just joyriding, you sons of bitches. Anyway, nobody's getting mail today. Anyway, so what I've done here is, again, sugar. I've seen that the sugar level and the types of sugar kind of vary from. I've seen the one I was using called for muddled sugar, which I like the best, but I decided to make my own simple syrup. A lot of them will call for simple syrup. I've even seen one call for agave syrup. That just seems crazy to me. And although it's just as likely to see this drink served on the rocks as straight up, I prefer my cocktails straight up, so which is why I have this served straight up. And also a lot of the changes is the garnish. The garnish on this particular recipe was almost identical to a Manhattan. It just called for one dark cherry. But I've seen some call for an orange or slice. I've seen some just call for zest of an orange, or I've seen some use a lemon. But I like the simple cocktail with just the cherry. I'm using the orange bitters. I mean, the only real difference between this and my Manhattan is the sugar. I'm using the simple syrup in place of, well, if I was making a Manhattan, I would use a sweet vermouth. It's really the only difference in my particular version of the classic cocktail. So you want to take a drink now? I tend to always use 2 full ounces when I make a cocktail. Damn, that's good. But because I know I'm going to make 2 cocktails, trying both this Tennessee whiskey, not bourbon, and the rye, I just did a jigger pour, just did 1.5 ounces. So I did 1.5 ounces of the whiskey, just under 1/4 ounce of the simple syrup. Again, the cherry with just a little bit of that juice left behind, and a few dashes of the Regan's orange bitters. That's good, man. That's really good, yeah. You know, when I've made these myself, even when I've had friends that really understand cocktails make them, I do like the drink. But I find a lot of bartenders out will will add a lot of extra sugar. They will up the simple syrup or whatever sugar they're using to make it a much sweeter drink. And a lot of them spend a lot of time on these crazy outlandish garnishes. Again, mostly intended to make the drink look pretty. But cocktails like food and beer, craft beer to be honest with you, are always best when left simple. That's why I love the classic Manhattan. Well, even the classic old fashioned doesn't call for a lot of ingredients. Here, this drink calls for the whiskey, the bitters, the sugar, and the garnish. So I've got 4 ingredients in here. I've got the whiskey, I've got, in this case, simple syrup, I've got the cherry, and I've got the bitters. That's all that's in this drink. My Manhattan is the whiskey, the bitters, the cherry, and the sweet vermouth. So, I mean, that's why I'm not a fan of nouveau bartenders, because most of them seem to think that everything has to taste like fruit juice and has to contain 20 to 30 liqueurs in it. This liqueur, that liqueur, it's got to be a pretty color. It's got to make sure you don't taste any of the alcohol. Well, these classic cocktails, even the old fashioned and the Manhattan especially, you're supposed to taste the liquor. That's why you use them. Anyway, I digress. Using my martini glass here. I hear them talking on the streets. Most of what they say is true. See a lot of me in that song. Here comes that lazy, no good snookeroo. It is interesting though. I've listened. Bernie Taupin was a great songwriter. I remember watching an interview with Elton John some years ago, and he was basically saying that Bernie Taupin was really more of a poet than a lyricist. So a lot of the lyrics were a little more difficult to put into song form. You kind of had to construct them as such. And if you look at a lot of Bernie Taupin lyrics, especially a lot of the early stuff, the late 60s into probably, I'm going to draw the line at 1975, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy album. I mean, there's a lot of lyrics there that really are more poetic than traditionally. What's the word I'm looking for? They look more like poetry than they do an actual lyric. They have to be kind of put in a certain way. And if you look at the lyrics for Snookeroo, it's really no different. It's very interesting. I was kind of surprised because I had to know who wrote that song, so I looked it up a while back. Elton John, some bitch. Bernie Taupin, because Bernie Taupin was one of my favorite lyricists. I kind of fancied myself a lyricist way back when. That's kind of what I wanted to be as a teen into being a young man, until I realized I just didn't have quite enough talent. I will go out on a limb and say I've still got a binder with some of my old lyrics, and I think I've got about a half a dozen that could be something if they were ever to get to the right hands, but my time has obviously passed me. But if you look, even now when I look at my own stuff and try to be objective, I can see where my influences are. I've got a few songs where there was a time where I was very heavily influenced by the Moody Blues. So you can really feel a Justin Hayward influence on a lot of my songs. Well, a lot of my lyrics, I guess I should say. Then I was also influenced a lot by Bernie Taupin, and I've got a handful that kind of, show that influence as well, but there are some Moody Blues songs like The Question and The Story in Your Eyes. I've got which were 2 songs I was really in love with as a teen. And you can really look at a couple songs. I don't necessarily steal from those, but you can see some similarities for sure, especially the words that I use, the way they're phrased. And again, a lot of them really are more poetry than traditional lyric. This is a nice. I'm interested to see what the rye will do different. I'm expecting to have less sweetness, more spice. But to be honest with you, even though I didn't talk a lot about the aromas and flavors of this particular cocktail, it does make a classic tasting Manhattan, in my opinion. This is a rather bold Tennessee whiskey, but it is our bourbon for the purpose of this video. Even though I don't believe Jack Daniels is bourbon, that is a bit of a controversy too, one way or the other. But I hear them talking on the streets. Most of what they say is true. Here comes that lazy, no good snooker. Anyway, I like that tune. I don't know that anybody ever recorded a novelty tune better than Ringo Starr. Oh My, the No No song. I mean, the man was brilliant. You really feel, you still can't feel, even with the additional sugars, you can feel the weight of this particular whiskey. It's a very bold whiskey, and so you can't feel the oak in there. You feel the vanilla, the toffee, the notes that this whiskey provides, but then you have that additional sweetness that makes the sweetness of the whiskey even that more intense. So there you go. But I am very curious to check out the rye and to see how much difference, using the same brand. That's why I chose these two, because they're the same brand. So using their Tennessee whiskey and then the bourbon to make the same cocktail. Anyway, I am Tom the Whiskey Whisperer, Whiskey Evangelist, prolific whiskey drinker, pervert wisdom man. All right, good guy. Cheers, y'all. Have a good one. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.